Hello, my name is Elias Kapoor, and if you ask me what I do, I'd probably give you a weary smile and say I'm trying to survive the storms my own family has stirred up. The story I'm about to tell isn't a fairy tale, nor is it a Hollywood movie with a guaranteed happy ending. It's my life, a messy tangle of love, betrayal, and wounds that never seem to heal. I should probably start with the phone call that changed everything. It came at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, right in the middle of reviewing blueprints for a community center in East Vancouver. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, which usually meant I'd let it go to voicemail. But something, maybe instinct, maybe fate, made me pick up. "Is this Elias Kapoor?" The voice was clinical, professional, the kind that delivers news you never want to hear. "Yes, this is Elias." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Sir, I'm calling from Vancouver General Hospital. There's been an accident involving your wife, Elias Kapoor. You need to get here immediately." The blueprints scattered to the floor as I stood up too quickly, my chair spinning behind me. "What kind of accident? How is she?" But the line had already gone quiet in that particular way that tells you everything you need to know. I remember fragments of the drive to the hospital, the way my hands shook on the steering wheel, how the radio kept playing that stupid love song Alina hummed while making breakfast, the taste of copper in my mouth as I bit down on my tongue to keep from screaming. Vancouver's familiar streets blurred past me like watercolors in the rain. At the hospital, a doctor with kind eyes and terrible news confirmed what my heart already knew. Alina was gone. A drunk driver had run a red light at the intersection near her school. She'd been heading home from her after-school tutoring program, probably thinking about dinner, maybe about the weekend we'd planned to visit the farmer's market. She didn't suffer, the doctor said, and I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Because I was suffering. I was suffering enough for both of us. The next few hours passed in a haze of paperwork and phone calls. I called Priya, Alina's younger sister, who screamed into the phone and then went silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. I called my best friend, Amir, who left his design meeting and drove straight to the hospital to sit with me in those plastic chairs that seemed designed to make grief even more uncomfortable. But the call I dreaded most was the one I had to make to my parents. My father, Devraj Kapoor, answered on the second ring. He always did. Punctuality was one of his many rigid principles. "Elias, this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "Dad, I have terrible news. Alina, there was an accident. She's gone." "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "She's dead, Dad. My wife is dead." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had that careful tone he used in business meetings. "I see. That's unfortunate. When is the service?" "Unfortunate?" "My wife was dead, and it was unfortunate." "I don't know yet. Probably this weekend, Saturday or Sunday." And that's when the universe decided to twist the knife. Because as those words left my mouth, I remembered what this weekend was. Rohan's wedding. My younger brother's destination wedding in Italy, the event my parents had been obsessing over for 8 months. "Elias," my father said carefully, "you do realize Rohan's wedding is this weekend?" "Yes, I realize that." "In Italy." "Yes, Dad, in Italy." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, he said, "We'll have to discuss this later. Your mother and I are meeting with the wedding planner." The line went dead. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the hospital's fluorescent lights, and felt something crack inside my chest. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was the sharp, clean break of understanding. The calendar pages in my mind flipped back to all the times Rohan had been the golden child, the favored son who could do no wrong. The business degree from Wharton, the engagement to Anika Chopra, daughter of a wealthy shipping magnate, the perfect life that fit our father's vision of success. And then there was me, the architect who designed community centers instead of luxury condos. The son who married a public school teacher from a working-class family. The disappointment. Elias? Amir's voice pulled me back to the present. He'd been sitting beside me for who knows how long, probably watching me spiral. What did they say? I looked at him. This man who'd been my friend since university, who'd been best man at my wedding while my own brother was too busy to attend. Amir's dark eyes were full of concern and something else, a kind of protective anger that I wasn't ready to acknowledge yet. They said it's unfortunate, I whispered. The call came the next morning, while I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at Alina's coffee mug still sitting in the sink. She'd used it Tuesday morning, filled it with her favorite Earl Grey tea, left a lipstick print on the rim that I couldn't bring myself to wash away. Elias, my father's voice was brisk, businesslike. Your mother and I have discussed the situation. The situation, as if my wife's death was a scheduling conflict. Have you now? We understand this is difficult for you, but we cannot abandon Rohan at his wedding. This is a crucial moment for our family's reputation. The Chopras have invited some very important people. Important people! I stood up so fast the kitchen chair fell backward. More important than your daughter-in-law's funeral? Alina was never really part of this family, Elias. You know that. The words hit me like a physical blow. Never part of this family. Alina, who'd tried for 5 years to win their approval, who'd learned to cook traditional Punjabi dishes from YouTube videos because my mother refused to teach her, who'd endured their cold politeness at every family gathering, smiling through their subtle insults about her background. She was my wife, and Rohan is our son, our blood. We made commitments. I'm your son too, the words exploded out of me. Or have you forgotten that? Don't be dramatic, Elias. You're being emotional. Emotional. God forbid I be emotional about my wife's death. We can attend a memorial service when we return from Italy, something small, tasteful, but the funeral, that's just not possible. I hung up. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother. Beta, she said softly, using the endearment she'd rarely called me in recent years. I'm sorry about Alina. I truly am. But you're still going to the wedding. A long sigh. Your father. He's already made the arrangements. The Chopras are expecting us. If we don't show, if you don't show, what, the world ends? Your reputation crumbles? You don't understand the pressure. I understand that my wife is dead, Mama. I understand that I called you yesterday hoping for comfort, for support, for family. And instead I get a lecture about reputation and commitments. Beta, please, after the wedding, we can... After the wedding? You can stay in Italy. Don't come back for the funeral. Don't come back for the memorial. Don't come back at all. I hung up again. The funeral was held on Saturday afternoon at a small chapel in East Vancouver, not far from the elementary school where Alina had taught. I'd half expected, hoped maybe, that my parents would surprise me, that they'd show up at the last minute, that family would win out over whatever twisted priorities had taken over their hearts. They didn't. But others did. The chapel was full of her students' parents, fellow teachers, neighbors from our apartment building. Mrs. Chen from the corner store brought flowers. The mailman came. 3 families Alina had tutored her children for free were there, some of them having taken time off work they probably couldn't afford to lose.
Priya spoke about her sister's kindness, about the reading program she'd started for underprivileged kids. Amir, bless him, gave a eulogy about the woman who'd taught me to see architecture not as monuments to ego, but as spaces where communities could flourish. I spoke last, though I barely remember what I said. Something about love lasting beyond death, about carrying forward her dream of making education accessible to everyone. The words felt hollow in my mouth, like I was reading someone else's script. Afterwards, as people filed out offering condolences, Priya grabbed my arm. "Where the hell are your parents?" "In Italy, at Rohan's wedding." Her grip tightened. They chose a party over their own daughter-in-law's funeral. She was never really part of this family, according to my father. Priya's eyes flashed with fury. "Then neither are you. You hear me, Elias? If they can't see what they've lost, then you're better off without them." I wanted to argue, to defend them somehow, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down, I knew she was right.
The apartment felt wrong without her. Not just empty, wrong, like someone had rearranged all the furniture while I wasn't looking. Her coffee mug still sat in the sink where I'd left it, a shrine to normalcy that I couldn't disturb. Her books were still stacked on the nightstand, bookmarks jutting out at various stages of reading she'd never finish. I tried to return to work the Monday after the funeral, but sitting in my office reviewing elevation drawings felt surreal. How could I care about ceiling heights and load-bearing walls when the foundation of my entire world had collapsed? When I had a panic attack during a client meeting, hyperventilating over bathroom tile choices, my partner Amir gently suggested I take some time. So I found myself alone with her things, her presence, her absence. That's when I discovered the journals. Alina had kept them in a wooden box under our bed, dozens of composition notebooks filled with her careful handwriting. Lesson plans mixed with personal reflections, sketches for bulletin board displays alongside poetry she'd never shown me. Reading them felt like eavesdropping on her thoughts, but I was desperate to hear her voice again, even if only in my head. March 15th. Elias was working late on the community center project again. I love watching him when he's focused on something meaningful. His whole face changes, like he's channeling something bigger than himself. I wish his family could see this side of him instead of constantly measuring him against their narrow definition of success. April 2nd. Met with the principal about the summer reading program. If we could get funding, we could reach another 50 kids who might not have books at home. Elias said he'd help design a mobile library cart. Sometimes I think we were meant to find each other. Two people who believe that small acts of love can change the world. September 8th. Elias's mother called him today. I could tell from his voice afterward. He gets this hunched, defensive posture whenever he talks to his family, like he's bracing for impact. I hate that they make him feel small. He's the biggest-hearted person I know. The last entry was dated the Monday before she died. October 20th. Planning the Winter Literacy Festival. Elias sketched out ideas for reading nooks in the school library, cozy spaces where kids can disappear into books. Reading corners, he called them. He gets it. He gets that education isn't about buildings, it's about creating places where minds can grow. I'm so lucky to love someone who sees the world the way I do. I closed the journal and cried until my ribs ached. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night I dreamed about her for the first time since the accident. We were in our kitchen and she was making that terrible attempt at Indian food she'd been perfecting, flour in her hair, laughing at some joke I'd made. But when I reached for her, she started fading, becoming translucent. "You have to keep going," she said, her voice echoing like it was coming from very far away. "You have to finish what we started." "I don't know how." "Yes, you do. Look around." When I woke up, I was staring at her final journal entry, and for the first time since the phone call, I had a direction. "You want to renovate a what now?" Amir looked at me over his coffee cup, eyebrows raised. "A library. The elementary school in East Vancouver where Alina used to volunteer. Their library is falling apart, water damage, broken shelves, books from the 1970s. We were sitting in our usual cafe near the office. The first time I'd left my apartment in a week. Priya had called the night before, updating me on her nonprofit's education initiatives, and mentioned the school's desperate need for funding. "And you want to do this for free?" "I want to do this for her. For them. For..." I gestured vaguely, trying to capture something I didn't have words for yet. Amir studied my face carefully. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look like hell, you haven't returned any client calls, and now you want to take on a charity project that'll cost us thousands." He leaned forward. "But I'm in." "You are?" "Elias, I watched you design shopping centers and office buildings for 5 years, and you were good at it. But I've never seen you light up the way you do when you talk about community projects. Maybe it's time to listen to that."
2 days later, we visited Margaret Templeton Elementary School. The building was tired but clean, the kind of place where dedicated teachers perform daily miracles with outdated textbooks and sheer determination. The library was worse than I'd imagined, cramped, poorly lit, with shelves that looked ready to collapse under the weight of sun-faded encyclopedias. This was Mrs. Kapoor's favorite room, the principal, Ms. Rodriguez, said softly. She'd come here after school with struggling readers, turn it into this magical place where kids forgot they were supposed to hate books. I walked to the window, looking out at the playground where children were running around during recess. Their laughter drifted through the glass, and I could almost see Alina among them, crouched down to tie shoelaces or settle playground disputes. "What would you need?" I asked, "to make this work?" Ms. Rodriguez's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into the project with an intensity that worried Priya and energized Amir. I designed reading nooks built into window alcoves, child-height shelves arranged in cozy clusters instead of institutional rows, a story circle with soft seating where teachers could gather kids for read-alouds. But it was more than architecture. I found myself researching literacy programs, reaching out to book publishers for donations, coordinating with Priya's nonprofit to fund technology and new materials. For the first time since the accident, I was sleeping through the night. One afternoon, while sketching details for the circulation desk, I found a piece of paper tucked inside one of Alina's education journals. Her handwriting in blue ink. "The best things we build aren't made of glass and steel. They're made of care." I stared at those words for a long time, feeling something shift inside my chest. She was right, of course. She was always right about the things that mattered. "Elias," Priya appeared in my office doorway. "I brought coffee and questions." "Shoot." She sat on into the chair across from my desk, studying the library drawings. "This is beautiful. Alina would have loved it." "I hope so." "But you're avoiding something." I looked up from the sketches. "What do you mean?" "You haven't mentioned your family once since the funeral, not even to curse them out, which frankly they deserve." The familiar tightness returned to my chest. "What's there to say? They made their choice. And you've made yours, apparently, radio silence." "They chose Rohan's wedding over Alina's funeral. End of story." Priya leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Elias, I know what they did was unforgivable. Trust me, I've been fantasizing about keying your father's BMW for weeks. But this silence, it's eating you alive. I'm fine. You're designing libraries at 3 in the morning and living on takeout containers. That's not fine, that's survival mode." I wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. The project was consuming me, giving me purpose, but not peace. Every night I fell asleep thinking about reading nooks and wake up thinking about everything I'd lost. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Call them? Pretend everything's okay?" "I want you to stop pretending you don't care. Your family hurt you. It's okay to admit that." Before I could respond, Amir burst through the door holding his phone. "You need to see this," he said, breathless. "We have a problem. Or maybe an opportunity. I can't tell which." He showed me the screen. A local education blog had published an article titled, "Architect Honors Late Wife by Transforming an Inner-City Library." There was my photo and Alina's, and quotes from Ms. Rodriguez about the project. How did they... Priya's non-coded put out a press release. Apparently other schools are already calling wanting to know if you'll take on similar projects. I stared at the article, at Alina's picture smiling back at me, and felt a familiar mixture of pride and panic. "There's more," Amir said quietly. "Look at the timestamp. This went live yesterday morning." My heart sank as I realized what he was getting at. Yesterday morning, just as my family would be returning from their honeymoon in Italy, just as they'd be checking social media, catching up on missed news. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk," and Anika. Rohan's new wife. The woman who'd married into my family on the day we buried Alina. This was about to get complicated. The notification came while I was installing new light fixtures in the library. My phone buzzed against my work belt, a Google alert I'd set up months ago for the family name. Usually, it captured business press about Dad's real estate ventures or society page mentions of Mom's charity board positions. This time, it was different. The headline made my hands shake. "Kapoor family under fire for missing daughter-in-law's funeral for son's destination wedding." Someone had connected the dots. The article featured a side-by-side comparison that made me sick. On the left, a photo from the library renovation showing me surrounded by children and construction materials. On the right, Instagram photos from Rohan and Anika's wedding in Tuscany. Crystal chandeliers, flowing wine, my parents beaming in formal wear. The contrast was devastating. While Elias Kapoor honored his late wife by building literacy programs for underprivileged children, the article read, his family celebrated his brother's wedding at a luxury Italian resort. Sources close to the family confirmed that Devaraj and Sarla Kapoor chose not to attend Alina Kapoor's funeral, which was held the same weekend as their son Rowan's destination wedding. My phone started ringing immediately. Purporters mostly, but also numbers I didn't recognize. Probably people wanting to express sympathy or outrage. I turned it off and tried to focus on the wiring, but my hands were trembling too badly to work. "Elias?" Miss Rodriguez appeared in the library doorway, tablet in hand. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should see this." She showed me her screen. Social media was exploding. Hashtag Kapoor family scandal was trending. Strangers were sharing the story, expressing disbelief that parents would skip their daughter-in-law's funeral for a party. "Money can't buy class," one tweet read. "This family has neither." Imagine being so heartless you choose champagne over your son's grief. That poor man. At least he's honoring his wife's memory the right way. I sank into one of the tiny plastic chairs scattered around the worksite. "Are you okay?" Miss Rodriguez asked. "I never wanted this to be public," I said quietly. "I just wanted to build something beautiful for her." "You are building something beautiful. Don't let their shame diminish that." But it was too late. My phone, even turned off, felt like a bomb waiting to explode. I knew there would be reporters outside my apartment, my office, probably the school. I knew my father's carefully maintained reputation, built on decades of strategic charity donations and society connections,
was crumbling in real time. Part of me felt sick about it, but another part, a part I wasn't proud of, felt vindicated. That evening, Amir found me sitting in the unfinished library, surrounded by sawdust and shame. "Your dad released a statement," Amir said, settling onto the floor beside me. "Of course he did. Want to hear it? Do I have a choice?" Amir cleared his throat and read from his phone. "The Kapoor family's private decisions during a difficult time have been misrepresented in recent media coverage. We grieve the loss of Alina and support our son Elias, but we will not apologize for honoring prior commitments to our younger son's wedding. Family loyalty works both ways, and we trust that privacy will be respected during this challenging period." I laughed, but it came out bitter. Family loyalty works both ways. That's rich. "There's more. Someone leaked photos from the wedding reception, your parents giving toasts, dancing, all time-stamped during your wife's funeral service." The vindicative part of me wanted to see those photos, to have visual proof of their betrayal, but the exhausted part of me just wanted it all to stop. "I'm thinking about selling the apartment," I said quietly. "Maybe moving somewhere no one knows my name." "You could, or you could stay and keep building libraries. With every project covered by gossip blogs? No thanks." "Elias," Amir's voice was serious, "what would Alina want you to do?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text. I turned it back on to check for messages from contractors, but this one was from that same unknown number. "Please, just coffee. One conversation. Anika." I showed Amir the screen. "Rowan's wife wants to meet. The enemy wants to parley? She's not the enemy, she's just collateral damage." Another text appeared. "I never knew about the funeral. I would have said something. There are things you need to know." Amir raised his eyebrow. "Okay, maybe not just collateral damage." I stared at the messages, trying to imagine what Rohan's new wife could possibly want to tell me. Part of me was curious, but a bigger part was just tired. Tired of family drama, tired of being the abandoned son, tired of carrying grief and anger in equal measure.
But Alina's voice echoed in my memory. "You have to keep going. You have to finish what we started." Maybe that included facing the family that had rejected us both. "Fine," I texted back. "When and where?" The cafe Annika chose was neutral territory, a small place in Kitsilano that served overpriced lattes to yoga instructors and graduate students. I arrived early, partly out of nervousness, and partly to scope out escape routes if the conversation went south. She walked in exactly on time, and I was struck by how different she looked from the wedding photos I glimpsed online. No designer sari or elaborate jewelry, just jeans and a simple sweater, her long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger than I'd expected, and tired in the way that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well either. "Elias?" She approached my table hesitantly. "Annika." We shook hands awkwardly, like diplomats from warring countries attempting détente. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." I wasn't sure I would either. She ordered chai tea, I stuck with coffee, and for a moment we sat in silence while the barista worked behind us. "I need you to know," she said finally, "that I had no idea about the timing." "What do you mean?" "The funeral. When we were planning the wedding, no one mentioned that there might be a conflict. I knew Rohan had an older brother, but your parents never talked about you much. And when they did—" She paused, looking uncomfortable. "When they did what?" "It was always in past tense, like you were someone they used to know." The words hit harder than I'd expected. "That's because to them, I am." "But that's not—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I'm sorry, I'm not explaining this well." Our drinks arrived, giving us both a moment to regroup. Annika wrapped her hands around her mug like she was trying to warm herself. "After the wedding, when we got back to Toronto, I saw the news coverage. I asked Rohan about it, about why you weren't there, why no one had mentioned—" She took a shaky breath. "He said you were being dramatic,
that you'd been jealous of him your whole life, and this was just another attention grab. And you believed him? At first, I didn't know any better. But then I started asking questions about you, about your wife, about why the family never talked about your marriage. And the more I learned, the more I realized how wrong everything was. What did you learn? That Alina was a teacher, that she spent her own money buying supplies for kids who couldn't afford them, that she volunteered at homeless shelters and organized food drives. Annika's voice grew stronger. That she was exactly the kind of person that any family should be proud to claim as their own. I had to look away, blinking hard. She was. I also learned that you'd been asking your parents for years to get to know her better, that you'd invited them to school events where she was being honored, community dinners you hosted together. They never came. You've been doing your homework. Your grandmother's letters helped. I looked up sharply. What letters? Annika reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Meena Kapoor wrote dozens of letters before she died. Most of them were addressed to family members, but some were just observations, thoughts on the family dynamics, regrets about things she'd wished she'd said. My grandmother had been the only member of the Kapoor family who genuinely welcomed Alina. She had died 2 years ago, and I'd assumed her opinions had gone with her. Rohan doesn't know I have these, Annika continued. I found them in your mother's things when I was helping her organize the wedding gifts. She'd hidden them in the back of a drawer. What do they say? That she was proud of you for following your heart, that she thought Alina was the best thing that ever happened to this family, that she was ashamed of how Devraj treated both of you. She slid the envelope across the table. There are copies. I thought you should have them. I stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Why are you doing this? Because I'm pregnant, she said quietly. Congratulations, I said, though the word felt strange in my mouth. I keep thinking about the kind of family I want this child to grow up in, the kind of values I want to pass down. She touched her still flat stomach unconsciously, and I realized that if I stay silent about what I know, if I let your parents' version of events stand, then I'm complicit in something terrible. Your husband might not appreciate that perspective. My husband is complicated. He's not cruel, Elias, but he's been raised to see everything as competition. Your success as his failure, your happiness as his loss. She sighed. I'm hoping that becoming a father might change that. And if it doesn't? Then at least I'll know I tried to do the right thing. I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside were pieces of my grandmother's voice, validation I'd never known existed. There's something else, Annika said. Your mother wants to talk to you. My mother can pick up the phone. She's afraid you'll hang up, which, honestly, you probably should. She managed a small smile, but she asked me to tell you that she's sorry. Really, truly sorry. And that she has more of your grandmother's things she thinks you should have. I thought about Elena's journals, about the comfort I'd found in reading her private thoughts. Maybe my grandmother's words could offer something similar. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can ask. We finished our drinks in more comfortable silence, and as we prepared to leave, Annika hesitated. For what it's worth, she said, I would have come to the funeral. If I'd known, if I'd had a choice, I would have been there. Thank you. That means more than you know. Walking back to my car, I clutched the envelope of letters and tried to imagine what my grandmother's voice might tell me about forgiveness, about family, about moving forward when the people you loved had failed you so completely. Maybe it was time to find out. I waited until Saturday morning to open the envelope, when the apartment was quiet and I had nothing but time. Coffee in hand, I settled into the reading chair by the window, the one where Elena used to grade papers on Sunday mornings, and carefully unfolded the first letter. My dearest Elias, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and hopefully you have found these words when you need them most. I am writing this after your father's latest tantrum about your choices, though I suspect by the time you read this, there will have been many more. You must know, Beta, that you are exactly the kind of man I hoped you would become. Thoughtful, principled, brave enough to choose love over expectation. Your father sees this as weakness, but I see it as strength. It takes courage to build a life that reflects your values rather than your inheritance. The handwriting was shaky but determined, typical of my grandmother in her final years. I could almost hear her voice, the slight accent she never lost, the way she called everyone Beta regardless of their age. I have watched you with Elena, and I have never seen you happier. She brings out the best in you, your creativity, your compassion, your ability to see beyond the narrow world your father has constructed for us all. She is a gift, Beta, and gifts should be treasured, not criticized. I am ashamed to say I did not speak up more often in your defense. I am a product of my generation, taught to defer to the men in the family even when they are wrong. But silence is complicity, and I have been complicit in your father's treatment of you for too long. My hands were shaking as I reached for the second letter. This one was addressed to my mother. Sarla, you and I have never been close. I understand that I was not the mother-in-law you hoped for, but I write to you now as one woman to another. I see how you struggle between loyalty to your husband and love for your sons. It is not an easy position. But you must know that your silence hurts Elias more than Devraj's anger ever could. A father's disappointment stings, but a mother's abandonment scars. Elias needs to know that someone in this family chooses him, stands with him, fights for his happiness. I will not be here much longer to be his advocate. That role falls to you now. Do not let fear of Devraj's reaction stop you from loving your son fully.
To whoever finds these letters, I have lived in this family for 60 years, and I have seen how pride can poison love, how tradition can become a cage, how the pursuit of status can cost us everything that actually matters. Elias is the future of this family, not because he is the eldest, but because he understands that wealth without compassion is worthless, that success without service is empty. He builds spaces where communities can flourish. He chooses partners who share his values rather than his bank account. He is becoming the kind of man who makes the world better simply by existing in it. If this family cannot see that, then this family does not deserve him. But families are not permanent things. They can be rebuilt, reformed, redeemed. It is not too late, but it is getting close. I set the letters down and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the city where I'd tried so hard to build a life that would make both my grandmother and my wife proud. The weight of validation was overwhelming. Here was proof that someone in my family had understood, had seen the value in the choices I'd made. But there was also sadness, because she'd carried these thoughts alone, had felt unable to speak them while she was alive. The final letter was the longest, addressed simply, "To my family." I am dying, and with death comes a clarity I wish I had possessed in life. I see now how our pursuit of respectability has made us unrecognizable to ourselves, how our fear of judgment has turned us into judges of the people we should love most. Elias, you are not the disappointment your father believes you to be. You are the hope I always carried for this family's future. Continue building spaces where people can grow, love, and thrive. Continue choosing compassion over convention. The world needs more architects like you, builders of community, not just buildings. Devraj, your son's success is not measured by his ability to replicate your choices, but by his ability to make his own. You have built an empire of brick and mortar, but Elias builds something far more valuable: connections between people,
bridges between communities. Be proud of him, Beta. I am. Sarla, you still have time to be the mother Elias needs. Stop waiting for your husband's permission to love your son fully. And to whoever Elias chooses as his family, blood or chosen, protect him. He gives his whole heart, which means it can be completely broken, but it also means he can love in ways that transform the world. There is a box in my closet, behind the winter coats. In it, you will find blueprints and photographs of a project I never completed, a women's shelter I dreamed of building in East Vancouver. I had the land, I had the plans, I had the vision. What I didn't have was the courage to act against your grandfather's wishes. Perhaps it is not too late for someone else to finish what I started. With all my love and hope for your future, Nani. I read that last letter 3 times before it sunk in. A women's shelter. My grandmother had been planning to build a women's shelter, and my grandfather had stopped her. I thought about Alina's journals, about her dreams of education programs and community support. I thought about the library project, about building something in her memory had given me the first real purpose I'd felt since her death. Maybe it was time to dream bigger. 3 weeks later, I stood outside my childhood home in Toronto's Forest Hill neighborhood for the first time since Alina's funeral. The mansion looked exactly the same. Intimidating stone facade, perfectly manicured gardens, the kind of understated elegance that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. I hadn't called ahead after weeks of exchanging texts with Annika and reading and rereading my grandmother's letters. I'd finally worked up the courage for this conversation. But courage and planning were 2 different things. The housekeeper, Mrs. Patel, answered the door with surprise and obvious pleasure. "Elias, Beta, what a wonderful surprise! Your parents are in the study." She led me through the familiar hallways lined with family portraits and the wards from various charity boards. Nothing had changed. The same Persian rugs, the same crystal chandelier in the foyer, the same sense that everything in this house existed primarily to impress visitors. My parents were indeed in the study. My father behind his massive mahogany desk, my mother in her usual chair by the window with a cup of tea. They looked up when I entered, and I watched a complex series of emotions cross their faces: surprise, wariness, something that might have been relief.
"Elias," my mother said, standing quickly. "Beta, we didn't know you were coming." "I didn't know I was coming until this morning." My father remained seated, his expression carefully neutral. "To what do we owe this unexpected visit?" "I've been thinking about family," I said, taking the chair across from his desk. "About what it means, about what it costs, about what happens when we choose status over love." "Elias, if this is about, it's about a lot of things, Dad. It's about the fact that you've turned your back on me so completely that your daughter-in-law didn't even know I existed. It's about the fact that you chose a party over your son's grief. It's about the fact that Nani spent 60 years in this family and died knowing that none of you understood what actually mattered." My mother's teacup rattled against its saucer. "You've been talking to Annika." "I have. And I've been reading Nani's letters." The color drained from my father's face. "What letters?" "The ones where she calls me the hope of this family. The ones where she says she's proud of my choices, proud of my marriage, ashamed of how you've treated us." I pulled out copies of the letters, setting them on his desk. "The ones where she talks about the women's shelter she wanted to build, the project Nana stopped her from completing." "Those letters were private," my mother whispered. "They were hidden. There's a difference." My father picked up one of the letters, scanning it with the same expression he wore when reviewing contracts. "Your grandmother was ill toward the end. Her judgment was fine, Dad. It was her courage that failed her, just like Mom's is failing her now." "Don't you dare," he started, but I cut him off. "No, you don't get to be angry. You don't get to defend your choices or explain your priorities. You missed your daughter-in-law's funeral for a wedding reception. That's not a scheduling conflict, that's a moral failure. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. The same clock that had counted down my childhood in this house, measured out the years I'd spent trying to earn their approval. She was never really part of this family, my father said finally, the same words he'd used on the phone. Because you never let her be. Because she wasn't rich enough, connected enough, traditional enough for your narrow definition of acceptable. I leaned forward. Do you know what she did every Sunday for 5 years? She volunteered at a homeless shelter downtown, serving breakfast to people who reminded her of her own grandfather. Do you know what she spent her teacher's salary on? School supplies for kids whose parents couldn't afford them. Elias, my mother tried to interrupt. Do you know what she wanted for her birthday last year? Not jewelry or vacations. She wanted me to design a mobile library that could serve rural communities. She wanted to make sure every child had access to books. My voice was rising. 5 years of frustration finally finding its outlet. That's the woman you couldn't be bothered to mourn properly. That's the daughter-in-law who wasn't good enough for this family. My father's jaw was tight, his hands clenched on the desk. We had commitments. You had choices, and you chose wrong. My mother suddenly stood, her teacup clattering to the floor. Stop it! Just stop it! Both my father and I turned to her in surprise. In 43 years, I'd rarely heard her raise her voice. You're right, she said, looking at me with tears streaming down her face. We chose wrong. I chose wrong. I should have been there. I should have held you while you grieved. I should have honored the woman who made you happier than I had ever seen you. Sarla, my father warned. No, Devraj, I'm done being quiet. I'm done choosing your reputation over our son's heart. She turned back to me. I loved Alina. I was afraid to show it, afraid of making your father angry, afraid of disrupting the family dynamics. But I loved her intelligence, her kindness, the way she looked at you like you hung the moon. Then why? Because I'm a coward. The words came out as a whisper. Because I've spent 30 years of marriage learning not to rock the boat, not to question decisions, not to put our son's happiness above their father's expectations. My father stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. This is ridiculous. We're successful people with responsibilities. We're miserable people with bank accounts. When's the last time we had a real conversation? When's the last time we laughed together? When's the last time we chose love over image?
I will not be lectured. Then don't be lectured. Be educated. I stood too, pulling out my phone. These are pictures from the library project, the one I'm building in Alina's memory. I showed them photos of children, reading in the cozy nooks I'd designed, teachers smiling as they worked with new technology, the plaque by the entrance that read, "In memory of Elias Kapoor, who believed every child deserves a story." This is what your daughter-in-law's legacy looks like. This is what happens when you choose service over status. I put the phone away. And this is what I'm doing with Nunny's women's shelter plans. I'm building it. With or without your approval, with or without your money, with or without your presence in my life. My father sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 68 years. I didn't know, my mother said quietly, about the shelter plans. There's a lot you didn't know, because this family stopped talking to each other years ago. I picked up Nunny's letters from the desk, but it's not too late. It's never too late to choose differently. I walked toward the door, then turned back. I'm not asking for an apology. Apologies don't bring her back, don't undo the damage, don't change what you chose when it mattered most. But if you want to be part of the family I'm building, the one based on love instead of legacy, you know where to find me. My mother followed me to the door. Betha, wait. What, Mom? Your grandmother's box, the one with the shelter plans. It's in my closet upstairs. I'll get it for you. Keep it for now. When you're ready to choose your son over your husband's pride, bring it to me yourself.
I left them standing in their perfect house, with their perfect reputation and their completely broken family. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The box arrived 3 weeks later, delivered not by a courier, but by my mother herself. I answered the apartment door to find her standing in the hallway, clutching a wooden chest against her chest like armor. "I wasn't sure you'd see me," she said. "I wasn't sure I would either." She looked around the apartment, the first time she had ever been inside the home Alina and I had shared. Her eyes lingered on the photos covering the refrigerator, the books stacked everywhere, the cozy chaos of a life built around love rather than appearances. "It's lovely," she said quietly. "It feels like a home." Alina made it that way. We sat at the small kitchen table where Alina and I had shared thousands of meals, and my mother carefully opened the box. Inside were rolled blueprints, photographs of a vacant lot in East Vancouver, letters from city planners, and a leather journal filled with my grandmother's careful notes. "She worked on this for 3 years," she said, unrolling the architectural plans. "Your grandfather forbade her from actually building it, said it would bring the wrong kind of attention to the family." I studied the blueprints, recognizing my grandmother's practical approach to space and light. The shelter was designed to feel like a home rather than an institution. Private family units, a communal kitchen, a children's play area, and office space for social services. "Why are you bringing this to me now?" My mother's hands twisted in her lap. "Because your father and I are separating." I looked up sharply. "What?" "We had the first real conversation we'd had in years, and I realized that I don't know the man I married anymore, or maybe I never knew him at all. 30 years of marriage, and it took our son's grief to show me what we'd become." "Mom, I'm moving out next week, getting an apartment downtown near the art gallery. I want to remember what it feels like to make my own choices." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. "Are you okay?" "I'm terrified, and I'm hopeful. Is that possible?" "Yeah, I think it is." She turned her hand palm up, squeezing my fingers. "I want to help with the shelter. Not with money. Your father controls all of that, and it'll be tied up in lawyers for months. But with time, with effort. I want to be part of something that matters." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. I have 40 years of silence to make up for."
Over the next 2 months, the project consumed us both. I refined my grandmother's architectural plans, updating them with modern building codes and accessibility requirements. My mother researched social services, connected with women's advocacy groups, learned about trauma-informed design principles. Priya threw herself into fundraising with the kind of fierce determination that reminded me why Alina had loved her sister so much. Amir juggled the shelter project with our regular clients, somehow making the numbers work when I was too emotionally invested to think about practicalities. The media attention was overwhelming at first. Grieving architect builds shelter in honor of late wife and grandmother. Kapoor family drama sparks community development project. From family feud to social justice, a Toronto architecture story. But gradually, the focus shifted from family gossip to the work itself. Other architects volunteered their services. Construction companies offered discounted materials. The city fast-tracked our permits. 6 months after that confrontation in my father's study, we held the groundbreaking ceremony on a crisp October morning. I stood in the vacant lot my grandmother had quietly purchased decades earlier, surrounded by the family I'd chosen: Priya, Amir, my mother, even Annika, who'd driven down from Toronto with her newborn son. "Today, we're breaking ground on more than just a building," I said to the small crowd of supporters, volunteers, and local politicians who'd gathered. "We're breaking cycles, cycles of silence, cycles of conditional love, cycles of choosing image over impact." I looked at my mother, who was crying quietly in the front row. "My grandmother,
Meena Kapoor, designed this shelter 30 years ago because she believed that everyone deserves safety, dignity, and the chance to rebuild their lives. My wife, Alina, spent her career creating spaces where children could grow and learn and dream. Today, we're honoring both of their visions. The first shovel of earth was ceremonial, but it felt like the most important construction I'd ever done. That evening, I sat in the apartment, quieter now without the constant planning meetings and phone calls, and opened Alina's journal to the last entry she'd ever written. October 20th. Planning the Winter Literacy Festival. Elias sketched out ideas for reading nooks in the school library, cozy spaces where kids can disappear into books. Reading corners, he called them. He gets it. He gets that education isn't about buildings, it's about creating places where minds can grow. I'm so lucky to love someone who sees the world the way I do. I touched the words, then reached for my own notebook and began to write. Alina, we broke ground on Nani's shelter today. You would have loved seeing all those people come together for something bigger than themselves. Mom was there, really there, not just physically present but emotionally invested. She's becoming the person I always hoped she could be. I think I'm becoming that person too. The one you saw in me before I saw it in myself. The one who builds bridges instead of walls, who chooses connection over protection. I miss you every day. But I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm building. For you, for Nani, for all the people who need safe spaces to become who they're meant to be. I love you. I'll always love you. But I'm learning to love the world again too. 9 months later, I stood in the completed courtyard of the Meena and Alina Kapoor Women's Shelter, watching a little girl named Sophia plant marigolds in the memorial garden. The morning sun cast long shadows across the space, highlighting the way the building's curved walls created intimate alcoves while still maintaining sightlines for safety. The architecture had turned out better than I dared hope. The shelter felt like a neighborhood rather than an institution. Individual family units clustered around shared common areas, children's spaces flowing naturally into adult supervision zones, gardens and patios that brought the outside in. "The flowers are pretty," Sophia said, patting soil around the bright orange blooms. "My mama says they mean remembrance." "That's right. We plant them to remember people we love." "Like your wife?" "Like my wife." Sophia was 6 years old and had been living at the shelter with her mother for 2 months while they waited for permanent housing. She reminded me of Alina's students, bright, resilient, quick to trust despite having every reason not to. "Will you come to the opening ceremony?" she asked. I wouldn't miss it. The official opening was scheduled for the afternoon, but I'd come early to walk through the building alone, to see it through Alina's eyes and my grandmother's dreams. The main lobby featured a wall of photographs, women who'd moved through the shelter into stable housing, children who'd continued their education, families who'd rebuilt their lives within these walls.
But it was the small plaque by the front entrance that meant the most to me. The Meena and Alina Kapoor Women's Shelter, built from compassion, open to all, in honor of 2 women who believed everyone deserves a safe place to grow. My phone buzzed with a text from Priya. "Running late, but we'll be there soon. Mom's bringing cookies for the kids." Over the past year, my relationship with my mother had deepened in ways I hadn't thought possible. She'd thrown herself into the shelter project with an intensity that suggested she was making up for lost time, and in many ways, she was. She'd learned to advocate for funding, to navigate social services, to see beyond the comfortable bubble of her previous life. My father and I had achieved something that might generously be called détente. We didn't speak often, but when we did, the conversations were civil, sometimes even warm. The divorce proceedings had been brutal, but they'd also been clarifying. My mother was discovering who she was without his constant disapproval, and apparently, she was someone remarkable, Elias? A familiar voice made me turn. Annika stood in the lobby entrance, her 9-month-old son balanced on her hip. I hope it's okay that we came early. Of course. How's little Ilian doing? She'd named her son after Alina and me, a gesture that had surprised everyone, including Rohan. My brother and I still weren't close, might never be close, but we'd achieved a grudging respect for each other's choices. He's perfect, and he loves the garden already. She gestured toward the windows overlooking the courtyard. Alina would have loved this place. I hope so. I know so. She adjusted the baby, who was reaching toward a mobile of paper cranes hanging near the reception desk. There's something peaceful here, something that feels like hope. The afternoon ceremony was small and meaningful. The mayor spoke about community partnerships. The director of social services praised the trauma-informed design. Several women who'd found safety within these walls shared their stories. But it was my mother who surprised everyone, including me, when she approached the microphone. My name is Sarla Kapoor. I'm Elias's mother, and I failed him for most of his adult life. A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't part of the planned program. I failed him when he chose love over expectation. I failed him when he needed support for his marriage. And I failed him most completely when his wife died, and I chose social obligations over my son's grief. Her voice broke slightly, but she continued. My son built this shelter to honor 2 remarkable women, his wife and his grandmother. But what he's really built is a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, service over status, healing over hiding. She looked directly at me. Beta, I'm proud of the man you've become, not because of what you've built, but because of how you've chosen to build it, with compassion, with integrity, with room for everyone to find their place. The applause was warm and sustained, but I barely heard it. I was thinking about the last letter my grandmother had written, about second chances and chosen families, and the courage to change course even when the path ahead is uncertain. After the ceremony, as the sun set over East Vancouver, I found myself alone in the memorial garden. The marigolds Sophia had planted that morning glowed like small suns in the fading light, and I could smell the jasmine my mother had insisted we include because it had been Alina's favorite. She's still with me, I whispered to the evening air, to the flowers, to the building that stood as proof that love doesn't end with death, it just changes form. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of the shelter coming to life. Children laughing in the playground, mothers talking quietly on the patio, the gentle hum of people beginning to heal. This was what Alina had seen when she looked at architecture, not just buildings, but possibilities. Not just spaces, but stories waiting to be written. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called my father. Elias? He sounded surprised, cautious. Dad, I wanted to tell you about the opening, about the shelter. A pause. Then, how did it go? It was beautiful, perfect, exactly what Nani and Alina would have wanted. I'm glad. You've done good work, son. Son. He hadn't called me that in years. There's still room for you to be part of this, if you want to be.
Another pause, longer this time. I'd like that. I'd like to try. Then come by next week, meet some of the families, see what we've built, see what's possible when we choose differently. After I hung up, I sat on one of the garden benches and watched the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow there would be more work, other projects, other communities that needed safe spaces to grow. But tonight, in this garden of remembrance and hope, I was exactly where I was meant to be. The plaque by the entrance was right. We had built from compassion, and we were open to all, including, finally, ourselves. And now, I said to Alina's memory, to my grandmother's legacy, to the future we were all building together. So are they all. In the distance, a child laughed, a mother sang a lullaby, and life, messy, complicated, beautiful life, continued to unfold in the spaces we'd created with love. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it'll take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.